Imagine a world untouched by time, long before cities, before kings, before even the idea of civilization. Earth, in its wild infancy, roared with oceans, groaned with mountains, and buzzed with creatures unlike anything we've ever seen. Towering ferns swallowed the horizon, and thunder cracked above jungles that had never known the weight of a human step. Into this primal landscape, something arrived, something not of beast or storm, but of stars. 445,000 years ago, they came. Celestial chariots, shimmering with unearthly energy, split through the atmosphere and crashed into the ancient seas. These were the Anunnaki, voyagers from a distant planet called Nibiru. They weren't explorers in the romantic sense, but desperate migrants. Their mission? Gold, not for vanity or wealth, but survival. Nibiru was no ordinary planet. It followed a massive 3,600-year elliptical orbit that took it far beyond the reach of Earth's sun. A world of fire and frost, warmed not by starlight but by deep volcanic activity. Yet even this internal engine couldn't sustain it forever. Their atmosphere, a crucial barrier against cosmic radiation and brutal solar flares, was crumbling. And the only known solution was to lace their skies with finely ground gold, microscopic dust that would reflect sunlight and stabilize their fragile climate. But Nibiru's supply was nearly gone. That's why they came here. They looked down at Earth, saw its oceans glittering with promise, its crust teeming with resources. This young planet offered something Nibiru could no longer provide. The mission was urgent, led by a brilliant figure named Enki. His name meant, "he whose home is water," and fittingly, he arrived on Earth's marshy shores, somewhere near what we now call the Persian Gulf. Enki wasn't a warrior. He was a scientist, an engineer, a dreamer, and the firstborn son of Anu, king of Nibiru. But despite his pedigree, he wasn't chosen to rule. That honor fell to his half-brother, Enlil. The tension between them was already ancient. As Enki's ship hissed to a halt and sank into the mudflats, he stepped out into an alien world. The atmosphere was breathable, though thick with unfamiliar scents. The Anunnaki had found what they came for, but harvesting it would be no easy task. Their first settlement was Eridu, home in the far away. Not a village, not a camp, it was a marvel. A spaceport, a command center, a launch station for future missions to Mars, which they called Lamu. This wasn't colonization in the usual sense. There were no flags to plant, no empires to declare. Their goal was raw and singular, gold extraction. Plain and brutal. At first, they tried it themselves. Teams of Anunnaki worked the swamps, sloshing through mud, scooping sediments, digging pits. The labor was exhausting and the yield, disappointing. Dissatisfaction festered, especially among the working class of their own kind. That's when Enki began to consider another way, something drastic, something that would change everything. He noticed Earth's native hominids, primitive, shambling, ape-like figures. Not intelligent by Anunnaki standards, but capable. Their eyes watched, their hands imitated, and in them, Enki saw not just a solution to the gold problem, but a legacy. A creation. He didn't act alone. Deep in the heart of Eridu, he called upon his half-sister Ninhursag, chief medical officer, master of genetics, and co-architect of what would become humanity. Together, they began the experiments, not merely crossing species, but redesigning life itself. Tinkering with DNA, grafting intelligence onto instinct, crafting a new being from clay and code. This was not a sudden event. It took time, failures, and tragedy. But eventually, it succeeded. The first humans were born not through myth, but through bioengineering. And as they opened their eyes, blinking beneath the low skies of Eridu, they saw gods. To the newly formed humans, the Anunnaki were divine. Towering in stature, cloaked in light, and speaking in tongues they couldn't comprehend, the creators walked among their creations like living myths. The humans were awed, reverent, obedient, curious. But to the Anunnaki, these new beings were tools. Intelligent enough to follow commands, durable enough to labor, and disposable if they failed. They were crafted to serve, to mine, to build. The early generations worked the marshes and riverbeds under the blazing sun, gathering gold not for themselves but for the skies. And as more of them were born, each slightly more refined, more capable, the Anunnaki began to document their success. On clay tablets, etched in a script called cuneiform, they wrote of Adamu and Tiamat, the first man and woman, whose tale would echo through ages and cultures. These names would change over time. To the Hebrews, they became Adam and Eve. The lush wetlands of Eridu turned into Eden. The forbidden knowledge, the spark of rebellion, it all began here, not in parable, but in purpose. The fall of man wasn't a sin. It was evolution, the price of awareness, but Enki's vision didn't stop at servitude. He saw something greater in these new beings, a spark of the divine, a sliver of potential. He wanted them to thrive. He wanted them to inherit. This put him, once again, at odds with his brother. Enlil, commander of the mission and heir to Nibiru's throne, saw humans as little more than livestock. They were useful but dangerous, a creation that could too easily grow beyond its limits. And he wasn't wrong to be concerned. As humans multiplied and spread, they began to question. They carved symbols of their gods. They mimicked tools. They learned to speak. The tension between the brothers became unbearable. While Enki taught language, medicine, and architecture in secret, Enlil plotted control. He saw the human expansion as a threat, not just to the mission, but to divine order. If these creatures could think for themselves, if they could dream, they might one day rival their makers. That fear would soon shape the fate of civilizations. But not all Anunnaki agreed with Enlil. Some, like Ninhursag, were torn. She had helped shape humanity. She had watched them grow. She wept at the idea of their extermination. Still, the council back on Nibiru was divided. Dissent grew. Murmurs spread of Enki violating divine boundaries, playing God in a world not his to mold. It all came to a head when one of Enki's own sons, Marduk, staked his claim, not just to Earth, but to rule among gods and men alike. Marduk was bold, charismatic, and driven. He believed he was destined to unite the worlds, Nibiru, Earth, and even Mars. To him, the humans were not slaves, they were subjects. Followers, worshippers. He fashioned temples, trained priests, and declared himself ruler of Babylon, a city unlike any before it. But ambition comes at a cost. Enlil and his sons, Ninurta and Nergal, saw this as betrayal, an open challenge to the cosmic order. The Anunnaki Council convened in Nippur, their sacred city, to judge Marduk's rebellion. Accusations flew, tensions boiled over, peace shattered. Enki, always the peacemaker, begged for restraint. But his voice, once respected, now suspected, was drowned in calls for action. The council chose to act decisively. They reached for weapons no being should wield. Weapons of terror. Radiant devices forged in the fires of cosmic knowledge, capable of erasing cities in blinding light and poisonous wind. Forbidden for ages, these were the same tools that once shaped stars. Now they would be used to end a rebellion. And so, Marduk fled. Babylon fell. The Golden Age ended not with a whisper, but with fire. What followed was a silence that stretched across the centuries. The gods withdrew. Humanity rebuilt. The myths lingered, but deep in the minds of those who remembered, one question burned. If the Anunnaki could create life, could they also destroy it at will? And if so, who truly held the power, the creators, or their creations? After the fall of Babylon, after the council's deafening verdict and the unleashing of forbidden fire, the earth changed. Not just its surface, but its soul. The land cracked beneath the weight of divine weapons. Storms blackened the skies, crops withered, rivers turned to poison, and among the humans, those who survived, whispers began to grow. They spoke of an evil wind, a death that came not from nature, but from gods. This evil wind, as it was recorded on ancient Sumerian tablets, was no ordinary disaster. It moved fast, invisible yet unstoppable, sweeping from city to city and leaving only silence. Enlil, once Lord of Command, had launched his celestial boat to escape it. His power meant nothing in the face of what had been unleashed. Ninhursag pleaded for mercy. Cities begged for intervention, but no plea, no prayer, could stop it. Even Enki, who had opposed the use of these weapons, was powerless to reverse what had begun. The cities that had once glowed with divine presence, Eridu, Nippur, Shuruppak, were turned to ash. The temples, the ziggurats, the libraries of clay and stone, all reduced to ruins. The gods vanished, their servants either perished or fled, and what remained of humanity was broken, not just physically, but spiritually. The survivors, those who somehow escaped the wind, hid in caves and forests, clutching fragments of what had once been divine favor. They no longer saw the Anunnaki as benevolent, no longer as gods. The illusion had shattered. The beings from the stars had proven themselves fallible, vengeful, divided, and yet, even in devastation, new myths were born. Among these survivors, stories began to circulate, not just of destruction, but of purpose. Some whispered that the catastrophe had been no accident, that the flood, the wind, the fire, these were not tragedies of nature or even vengeance, but part of a plan. A reset, a cleansing of an experiment that had grown too bold, too independent. These murmurs evolved over generations into legends of hidden councils, of shadowy agendas among the Anunnaki elite. Some said a faction of the gods had long feared humanity's potential. That they had allowed the evil wind to pass over Earth, not merely to punish Marduk, but to thin the human ranks. To start again with those who were still obedient. Still odd, this idea, that the gods engineered resets, became a seed in the stories of every civilization that followed. In Egypt, it was the weighing of the heart. In Mesopotamia, the flood. In Genesis, the wrath of heaven. The myths were not lies. They were echoes, translations of an ancient trauma humanity could barely understand. But Enki remembered. He wandered the scarred earth, heartbroken. His creations had suffered for the pride of others. His hopes for a peaceful coexistence, shattered. Yet he did not give up. He began to preserve what could be saved. Knowledge, etched onto lapis lazuli tablets. Instructions hidden in vaults. Warnings written in code. He foresaw a time when the Anunnaki might return, when Nibiru's long orbit would bring it close once more. Enki didn't see this return as salvation. He saw a danger. The planet's gravitational pull, he feared, could trigger more disasters, tsunamis, earthquakes, even solar storms. Worse, the return of the Anunnaki might reopen old wounds, divine rivalries, human rebellion, another clash of fate and ambition. But he also believed in a choice. Not fate, destiny. Fate, Enki wrote, is what happens when no one decides. Destiny is forged, and so, the tablets were hidden. The temples collapsed into legend. The stars moved, slowly bringing Nibiru back toward its long-lost cousin. And in the cities humanity built from the ashes of Sumer, Uruk, Babylon, Nineveh, the old symbols remained. Winged beings, tree of life, the double helix encoded in stone. We remembered, not perfectly, but deeply. Long after the flames died and the winds ceased, the world lay quiet, nursing its wounds. Forests crept over ruined cities. Rivers carved new paths through broken lands. Humanity, scattered and scarred, began to rebuild, not in the glory of the gods, but in the stubborn rhythm of survival. And yet, the memory of the Anunnaki refused to vanish. In hidden valleys and along riverbanks, people told stories about beings from the stars, of creation from clay, of destruction by fire and flood. These were not fables told to children. They were memories, softened by time, recast as myth. And they began to take shape again in stone and script. Priests and scribes, trained in the old ways, gathered what they could. In cities like Eridu and Nippur, rebuilt on the bones of their ancestors, they etched cuneiform into clay tablets. These records were not mere chronicles, they were warnings, blueprints, and testaments. Stories of Adapa, the wise human taught by the gods. Of Gilgamesh, the king who sought immortality. Of Atrahasis, who built a boat to escape the deluge. Each tale a thread, woven from the same fabric of truth and memory. The Eridu Genesis spoke of divine reigns that lasted thousands of years, echoing timelines recorded by later Egyptian priests like Manetho, who claimed gods ruled before the pharaohs. Babylonian scholars, like Berossus, described heavenly beings descending to Earth 432,000 years before their own time, a number absurd by modern standards, yet haunting in its precision. And still, the question lingered. Were these myths exaggerations, or fragments of a forgotten history? Enki believed the truth mattered. He knew most of the Anunnaki's knowledge would be lost, sealed away, buried, or taken back to Nibiru. But some, he hoped, would survive. He entrusted human scribes to record what they could. The divine knowledge, became a discipline, priesthoods dedicated not to worship, but to memory. Through these scribes, the legacy of the Anunnaki endured. The ziggurats and canals of Sumer were more than public works, they were echoes of the stars. Their proportions matched constellations, their stair-stepped forms reflected the chariot's descent. The temples were not just places of prayer, they were transmitters, aligned to celestial rhythms long forgotten by modern science. But even the scribes knew they were working against time. Libraries fell to fire. Invasions swept through Mesopotamia. The library of Ashurbanipal, the most complete collection of Anunnaki knowledge ever assembled, was burned, pillaged, and scattered. When Alexander came, then Rome, then the Caliphate, each wave buried another layer of the past. By the time the Hebrews wrote of Moses ascending Sinai to receive commandments etched in stone, they were unknowingly echoing Enki's dictation to Adapa. The Book of Enoch, later banned, spoke of a mortal taken to the heavens to record divine secrets. His role mirrored the ancient scribes of Eridu, writing under a sky watched by chariots. In every culture, remnants remained. Egypt's Thoth, god of wisdom, bore an ibis head but spoke like Enki. The Mayan Quetzalcoatl, a bearded foreigner who came from the sea, mirrored the tales of Enki arriving on earth. Even the Hindu Vimana, flying palaces of the gods, sounded suspiciously like celestial chariots. Across continents and centuries, scattered humans kept recalling the same origin story with different names. And beneath these stories lay another layer, a prophecy. Enki had written of it in the lapis lazuli tablets. He called it the return, not just of Nibiru, but of memory, of reckoning. He warned that the cycle would repeat, that every 3,600 years, the alignments of planets and politics would bring the gods, or what was left of them, back into Earth's orbit, both literally and metaphorically. But he didn't believe this return was predestined. Destiny, to Enki, was malleable. It was shaped by choice, action, intention. He saw humans not as pawns, but as heirs, capable of rising not only from ruin, but into wisdom. So he left them clues, symbols, stories, sacred geometry and encoded myths. Enough that, when the time came, they might remember. Not with fear, but with understanding. Even in the silence after destruction, the feud between Enki and Enlil cast a long shadow. Their rivalry wasn't a sudden conflict, it was a storm centuries in the making, born on Nibiru and deepened on Earth. While Enki believed in uplift, in the spark of knowledge and potential, Enlil saw structure, obedience, and hierarchy as the pillars of civilization. These were not just philosophical differences. They were battle lines. As human cities began to rise again, Uruk, Lagash, Kish, they did so under the watchful eye of the gods' chosen representatives. Kings claimed descent from Anunnaki bloodlines. Temples were built as both places of worship and command centers. And behind these earthly powers stood two opposing currents, the nurturing hand of Enki and the iron grip of Enlil. Enki's descendants, including Marduk, championed the freedom of mankind. They encouraged the building of empires, the codification of law, the spread of astronomy and architecture. To them, humanity was not just a tool, but a partner. A new intelligence, born from stardust and clay, capable of shaping its own destiny. But Enlil's camp did not trust this expansion. As cities grew, so did their independence. Priests began to question divine edicts. Kings grew bold, sometimes invoking the names of the gods not as worship, but as equals. Enlil feared this deeply. If the humans no longer feared their creators, what would stop them from turning against them? Then came the tipping point, cosmic unrest. The skies began to change. Omens appeared, shifts in star alignments, anomalies in the sun's path, unseasonal storms. To the ancient astronomers of Sumer and Akkad, these were messages from the heavens. But the messages were not clear. Marduk read them as signs of his rising destiny. He proclaimed himself the chief deity of Babylon, asserting divine right and celestial confirmation. To his rivals, especially Ninurta and Nergal, sons of Enlil, this was blasphemy. The Anunnaki Council was summoned once more, not on Nibiru, but in Nippur, their earth-based seat of judgment. The meeting was tense. Accusations were hurled like spears. Marduk stood defiant, claiming that the cycle of Nibiru favored him now. That the gods themselves had chosen him to guide Earth's future. His father Enki defended him, pleading for a peaceful resolution. He saw Marduk not as a rebel, but as evolution incarnate, a bridge between worlds. But Enlil's camp wouldn't have it. Ninurta's voice roared like thunder in the council chamber. He proposed a drastic measure, to unleash the weapons of terror once more. These were no ordinary weapons, they were remnants of the cosmic arsenal, radiant devices that could level mountains and leave entire regions uninhabitable. Forbidden since the last catastrophe, their use would mean breaking the divine law. And yet, Nergal stepped forward, volunteering to wield them. His heart burned with pride, with vengeance, and perhaps, with fear. He believed Marduk's rise would unravel the divine order. Enki, horrified, begged them to reconsider. He warned that this path would not just destroy cities, but history itself. That another act of mass destruction could sever the fragile link between the gods and their creation. But fear is a powerful motivator. And so the council, fractured and desperate, authorized the unthinkable. The weapons of terror were deployed. They fell upon Marduk's strongholds like thunder from heaven. The skies turned black, and the earth shook with the violence of gods. Cities vanished, fields turned to glass, the poison wind returned, sweeping across lands that had only just begun to heal. It was not just a war against Marduk, it was a message to all of humanity. Challenge the gods and face annihilation. But the message was garbled. Marduk survived, Babylon endured, and humans, for the first time, saw their gods not as all-powerful beings, but as squabbling factions driven by ego, fear, and flawed judgment. The divine mask slipped, the illusion cracked, and a new kind of awareness was born among the survivors, not just of the gods' power, but of their humanity. The priests of Sumer recorded these events, not as religious epics, but as history. Their tablets didn't just praise. They questioned, they preserved the records of war, of betrayal, of judgment gone wrong. Enki, broken-hearted but not defeated, gathered what remained of his knowledge. He knew now that peace between gods and men was not given, it had to be earned. It had to be built, not on obedience, but on wisdom. The old world had ended, but something new was beginning. Long before humans dreamt of reaching for the stars, the Anunnaki had already built the bridge between worlds. Earth was not their only station. Mars, known to them as Lamu, had been a crucial waypoint in their cosmic journey. Its red deserts, though barren by modern standards, were once a canvas of purpose. Here, amid rocky plains and dried riverbeds, the Anunnaki established a base. A resting place, a watchtower. Enki, ever forward-thinking, was the architect of this vision. He saw Lamu not just as a stepping stone between Earth and Nibiru, but as a sanctuary. A neutral zone. Its low gravity and access to ancient water sources made it ideal for storing supplies, repairing celestial chariots, and observing both planets without interference. He believed Lamu would outlast the wars of Earth, and in many ways, it did. When the dust of destruction settled across Mesopotamia, when the cities burned and gods withdrew, Mars remained silent, untouched by the flood, the wind, the fallout. But it held secrets. One of them was carved into its face. According to ancient records, when the exiled king Alalu, who had once ruled Nibiru, died on Lamu, his companion Anzu carried out a solemn task. Using the tools of their skychamber, Anzu hollowed a tomb from the red rock. But it was not merely a grave. It was a monument, a likeness of Alalu's face, shaped into the mountainside, a symbol of defiance, memory, and lost royalty. Later, much later, in our modern era, that same weathered visage would be photographed by orbiting spacecraft. Grainy, shadowed, half-eroded, but undeniably human-like. The face on Mars sparked debate, wonder, and ridicule in equal measure. Was it just a trick of light? A coincidence of erosion? Or was it exactly what Enki had intended? A riddle written in stone, waiting to be understood? To those few who preserved the deeper stories, the face was no surprise. It had been described in forbidden tablets, in fragments stored in secret, in scrolls whispered about by scribes of the Mi. The Anunnaki had left their mark not only on Earth, but across the solar system. And not all of them had left. Mars, like Earth, still bore traces of divine technology, buried vaults, dormant relay stations, power sources powered by crystal firestones. These were not machines in the human sense. They were self-sustaining constructs, harmonized with planetary frequencies, humming softly in silence, waiting for a signal. Enki, in his final messages to his most trusted disciples, hinted that such places held the keys to the next age. That when humanity matured, when it remembered what it had forgotten, these gateways would open again. And Lamu, abandoned, scarred, overlooked, would become central once more. But not all of the Anunnaki shared this vision. For while Enki looked to Mars with hope, others saw it as a fallback plan. A place to regroup, to rebuild power. There are whispers, passed down through veiled texts, that a faction remained on Lamu, even after Earth fell into silence. Guardians, rebels, or watchers, it's unclear. Some believe they observed Earth across the ages, watching empires rise and fall, waiting for the cycle to complete. Nibiru, after all, was not gone. Only distant. Its orbit, that grand 3,600-year ellipse, carried it far into the cosmic dark. But it would return, and when it did, the gravitational chaos could shake Earth again, shift rivers, tear open mountains, disrupt the very crust of the planet. These weren't myths, they were predictions, grounded in observation. And Enki feared what such a return might bring. He wrote of this in his lapis lazuli tablets, a prophecy encoded in myth and number. He called it the Day of Crossing, when the past and future would meet, when the children of clay would face the gods once more. And in the shadow of that day, Mars, silent, red, watching, waited. As the winds of destruction quieted and cities turned to dust, the survivors, Those few who had glimpsed the gods clung to memory as if it were fire in a freezing world. They had no temples, no chariots, no tablets that hummed with divine resonance. But they had words, and from those words grew the Mi, the sacred knowledge that once flowed from Enki himself. The Mi were not just commands or blueprints. They were codes of civilization, fractal instructions passed down through generations. Writing, law, astronomy, agriculture, all were gifts encoded in the Mi. Enki had created them not only as tools for survival, but as bridges between species. Between the created and the creators. And so, as humanity rebuilt, the Mi re-emerged. In the ziggurats of priests trained scribes to carve tablets of clay. The symbols etched into those tablets were echoes of star charts, of genetic equations, of planetary alignments far beyond human comprehension. But to the scribes, they were sacred duty, preserving the past so it would not vanish into ash again. The early cities, Eridu, Uruk, Sapar, were laid out with cosmic precision. Their orientation matched constellations, their step pyramids mirrored the descent of the gods, their canals flowed in patterns that mimicked the bloodstream of a larger organism. This was no accident, it was the Mi in action, knowledge once divine, now passed to mortal hands. Yet not all of the Mi remained. Some were sealed away, hidden in underground vaults, protected by riddles, cursed by glyphs. Enki feared that in the wrong hands, the Mi could be twisted. That the power to manipulate genetics, to terraform, to destroy, could lead humanity down the same path of pride that shattered the Anunnaki themselves. Still, fragments of the forbidden Mi survived. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the search for eternal life mirrors one of the oldest Mi, the secret of cellular renewal, a process the Anunnaki once used to extend their own lives for millennia. In the Atrahasis, the tale of the flood contains mathematical references to orbital patterns, water cycles, and planetary upheaval that align eerily with modern theories of extinction events. But the most haunting Mi was that of the Anunabiogenesis, the creation of mankind. It described how hominid DNA was mixed with that of the Anunnaki, not merely to create workers, but to encode a reflection. A mirror, the spark that Enki believed might one day burn brighter than any god. The text suggests that this act was not just scientific, it was philosophical. Enki believed in potential, in evolution, and he encoded that belief directly into the human genome. This idea, that we are not merely the children of Earth, but the heirs of stars, survived in distorted form in many cultures. The Egyptian pharaohs claimed descent from gods. The Vedic texts speak of star-born sages. The Hebrew Genesis speaks of man made in the image of a divine being. These are not isolated myths, they are shadows cast by the same original flame. But for all this sacred knowledge, danger loomed. The more humans remembered, the more they questioned. If the gods could die, could be wrong, could destroy entire civilizations, then were they gods at all? The priest kings feared this awakening. And so, over centuries, the Mi became myth. The deeper meanings were veiled in ritual. The scrolls were sealed, the tablets locked away, and those who remembered too much were silenced. Enki's followers dwindled, his name became taboo in some regions, whispered in secret. The god who loved mankind was replaced in pantheons by more demanding figures, storm gods, war gods, jealous deities who required blood and obedience rather than wisdom and growth. Yet the Mi endured, etched into stone, hidden in music, reflected in architecture, waiting to be reawakened when humanity was ready. When it had survived long enough, suffered deeply enough, and evolved far enough to ask the right questions again. Enki had always believed in this moment. Not fate, but destiny. The ancient texts tell us that the Anunnaki were gods, but gods with families, rivalries, lovers, and flaws. At the heart of their cosmic drama pulsed something unmistakably human. The need to pass on power, to claim legitimacy through blood. And it was through this obsession that the fate of both gods and mankind would be sealed. On Nibiru, dynasties were forged not just through strength, but through sacred bloodlines. Anu, the High King, ruled with the authority of ancient celestial lineage. His sons, Enki and Enlil, born of different mothers, each carried a claim. But Enlil, born of Anu's half-sister and thus preserving the purity of royal blood, was chosen as the heir. This decision would haunt the Anunnaki forever. Enki, the elder, the genius, the creator, was passed over. And though he outwardly accepted this verdict, a fire smoldered within. Not one of vengeance, but of vision. He would not rule by decree, but by legacy. His children, he believed, would carry his ideals further than any crown could. From this emerged a lineage that would alter history. Marduk, Enki's firstborn, was bold, charismatic, and destined to disrupt the divine order. He saw the earth not just as a mission site, but as a kingdom of his own. While Enlil's sons ruled from the shadows, enforcing their father's laws, Marduk walked among men. He taught them astronomy, architecture, and empire building. In Babylon, he found his throne, and in its ziggurat, the towering Anunnaki, he built a stairway not to heaven, but for the gods to descend again. This was more than defiance. It was a declaration. Marduk claimed dominion over earth. He named himself the chief deity of Babylon, eclipsing Enlil's legacy. And with that act, the war of brothers passed on to their sons. The old wounds reopened. Ninurta, Enlil's warrior son, saw Marduk's ascension as heresy. He believed only the Anunnaki Council could grant dominion. To him, Marduk's claims were sedition. Worse, blasphemy. Nergal, lord of the lower realms and master of weapons, agreed. And so they conspired to humble Marduk, to crush Babylon's rise before it could rewrite the divine order. But Marduk was not alone. He had allies, among humans, and even among the Anunnaki. Some believed his path represented evolution, that his integration with humanity was not a threat, but the next phase of creation. They saw in him a fusion, divine mind and mortal experience. A king forged by both stars and soil. This fragile balance could not last. The tipping point came not with a single act, but a storm of events, plagues, celestial omens, shifting alliances. The records describe comets flaring unnaturally, solar patterns breaking rhythm, and temples struck by lightning without clouds. These were seen as signs, warnings, or, to some, permission. The council met again, in sacred Nippur. And this time, their verdict was clear. They would destroy Marduk's influence. Not through exile, but through annihilation. The weapons of terror, once buried in shame after the last cataclysm, were unearthed again. Enki, horrified, pleaded with his kin. He reminded them of the last time such power had been unleashed, how cities had turned to shadows and wind had become death. But his voice was drowned in the drums of war. Ninurta and Nergal took the weapons, described as bringers of a blinding light and a poisonous wind, and launched them upon the cities loyal to Marduk. The skies screamed, the ground split, and once again, humanity paid the price for the gods' quarrels. Babylon was spared, but barely. The land around it withered. The air grew sour. The people, who once looked to the heavens for guidance, now turned away in fear. Marduk survived the assault, but his legacy was fractured. He would go into hiding, later re-emerging as a redeemer figure in later myths. Ra to the Egyptians, Baal to the Canaanites, Merodach to the Babylonians. His name changed, but his essence endured. And so did the bloodlines. For while gods waged wars above, their children walked the earth below. Some took mortal lovers, their offspring becoming kings, warriors, and prophets. The demigods of myth, Gilgamesh, Hercules, Osiris, were echoes of this genetic fusion. The royal houses of Sumer, Akkad, and later Egypt traced their legitimacy to these unions. Divine right was not metaphor, it was literal. The blood of the Anunnaki flowed through ancient thrones. But with that blood came burden. Dreams, visions, madness, the weight of memory not their own. The children of the gods were torn between two worlds, destined to rule, yet haunted by knowledge they barely understood. And in the shadows, Enki watched. His sons had fought, his cities had fallen, but his experiment, humanity, endured. And somewhere deep in the ruins of Babylon, he believed, the spark still glowed. Long before the dust of nuclear fire settled over Sumer's shattered cities, an earlier catastrophe had nearly wiped the slate clean, the Great Flood. To later generations, it became myth. To ancient scribes, it was memory. And to the Anunnaki, it was a calculated reset, a desperate gamble to purge a world spinning out of control. The story begins with whispers, grumblings from Enlil's court. As humanity multiplied, so did its independence. Cities grew unruly, people built monuments without divine sanction. The workers Enki had once designed as obedient hybrids had begun to dream beyond their purpose. They asked questions, they built empires, and worst of all, they forgot who made them. Enlil viewed this as dangerous. He believed the human experiment had run its course. Enki, on the other hand, saw growth where Enlil saw rebellion. He argued that human independence was a sign of success, not failure. But Enlil, backed by other senior Anunnaki, made a grim decision. They would not strike with weapons. Not yet. They would allow nature to cleanse the earth. The Anunnaki, with their mastery of cosmic patterns, knew what was coming. Nibiru's next approach would disturb Earth's gravitational harmony. Ice caps would melt, tectonic shifts would displace oceans, and a great tidal wave, global in scale, would wash away the works of man. And so, the gods watched. They prepared their sky chariots. They withdrew from the lowlands. And they issued a silent decree: let the flood come. But Enki could not let his creation die. In secret, he approached a man named Ziusudra, later known as Atrahasis, and in another culture, as Noah. Ziusudra was not an ordinary man. He was of mixed blood, part human, part Anunnaki, and he carried within him both the spark of reason and the seed of divine vision. Enki instructed him to build a vessel, not just a boat, but a sealed ark capable of withstanding the chaos to come. He provided dimensions, materials, even knowledge of how to preserve genetic material from Earth's creatures. This was not just a rescue, it was a reboot. The texts speak of black clouds boiling over the horizon, of earth trembling and oceans swallowing entire kingdoms. Temples crumbled, forests drowned, the sky turned to water. And yet, Ziusudra's ark survived. From the mountains where his vessel came to rest, tradition places this in the Zagros, others say Ararat, he released birds. He offered thanks, and he wept for the world that was gone. When the waters receded, the gods returned. But not all were pleased. Enlil, discovering Enki's disobedience, was enraged. He had wanted a clean break, a fresh start, free from human error. But now, the old bloodlines had survived. The memories endured, and humanity would rise again, wiser, warier, and no longer blindly obedient. Ninhursag, the mother of life and Enki's sister, pleaded for peace. She reminded Enlil that the humans were their children, flawed perhaps, but capable of greatness. And Anu, high above on Nibiru, sent a message: no more destruction. Let what had begun continue, and let its fate be decided by time, not fear. So began the second age of man. The survivors spread out. They rebuilt Sumer, but also reached into new lands: Egypt, the Indus Valley, the Levant. They carried with them fragments of knowledge, tales of gods, and the deep trauma of the flood. The world they created bore echoes of what came before: stepped temples, divine rulers, rituals of remembrance. But something had changed. Humans no longer saw the gods as perfect. They remembered the betrayal, the silence in the skies as the waters rose. The gods had watched them drown. Faith fractured. Some cultures deified Enki as a savior, Ea in Akkad, Ptah in Egypt. Others painted Enlil as a tyrant, the bringer of wrath. Still others saw the gods as absent figures, retreating into myth, fading into symbols. Yet through it all, the flood remained a universal scar. Every major culture preserved a version of it: the Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Hebrews, the Greeks, even distant Mesoamerican peoples. It was not a metaphor. It was a shared trauma etched into global memory. And beneath the floodwaters, deeper than myth, lay the truth. That once, the fate of humanity had rested on a single decision. A whisper in the night. A warning from a god who loved his creation more than the rules of his kind. Enki had broken divine law to save a future he believed in. And for that, humanity would always owe him its breath. As humanity rose again from the mud and silence of the flood, something new stirred within its spirit. No longer were men and women content to be mere tools of the gods. They remembered the destruction, the betrayal, the salvation, and those memories, passed down as stories, carved into stone, sung in ritual, gave birth to a new consciousness. The gods had walked among them. And yet, the gods had fallen short. In the cities of old, Eridu, Uruk, Nippur, temples were rebuilt. Ziggurats rose like stairways to the stars, their steps inscribed with names long forgotten in the modern age. The priesthoods who emerged were not simply religious leaders. They were stewards of memory. Their rituals preserved the actions and personalities of the Anunnaki, though over time, those personalities blurred into archetypes. Enki became the wise creator, the patron of fresh waters and knowledge. Enlil the stern lawgiver, god of wind and storms. Ninhursag the nurturing mother, keeper of life's essence. Marduk, the rebel and redeemer. But behind the myths lay truths the priests rarely spoke aloud. They remembered the chariots that blazed across the sky, the weapons that turned cities to ash, the flood that wiped away an age, and the tablets, those smooth, lapis lazuli artifacts etched with the Mi, remained hidden in vaults beneath the temples, consulted only in times of great crisis. Scribes whispered of devices that could heal sickness, of stones that glowed without fire, of mirrors that showed distant places. Some claimed that in the deepest chambers of Nippur, beneath the House of Tablets, a device still hummed quietly, powerful and untouched by time. Even more disturbing were the star charts. Preserved across Mesopotamia, they showed not just the moon and planets visible to the naked eye, but Uranus and Neptune, unknown to modern astronomers until millennia later. The orbit of Nibiru, marked in cuneiform spirals, extended far beyond Pluto. And yet, the priests knew it returned every 3,600 years. They called it the crossing planet, and in every city-state, astrologers watched the skies for signs of its return. When eclipses fell out of rhythm, when meteors streaked red across the heavens, when the seasons shifted or the tides grew wild, they feared that Nibiru was approaching again. But not all knowledge remained locked away. Some of the Anunnaki's gifts survived through culture. In Egypt, pyramids aligned perfectly with Orion's belt, mimicking star maps left behind by the gods. Their shafts pointed to Sirius, the home of the goddess Hathor, whom some whispered was once a visitor like the Anunnaki. In the Indus Valley, advanced city planning, water sanitation, and astronomical symbols echoed designs from long before the flood. Even in South America, high in the Andes, the ruins of Tiwanaku and Puma Punku defied explanation. Blocks of stone weighing hundreds of tons had been cut with a precision modern tools could barely replicate. Legends there too spoke of sky gods, of bearded strangers who came from the east bringing knowledge and language. Was this coincidence, or had Enki's experiment spread further than Sumer? One curious pattern emerged. In nearly every ancient culture, the earliest kings were said to have ruled for impossibly long periods, hundreds or thousands of years. These were not symbolic reigns. They were echoes of the time when Anunnaki blood flowed pure in human veins. When rulers were not elected, but born from the stars. But over time, that blood thinned. Human generations passed, the memory of direct contact faded, and the myths changed. The Anunnaki became gods of thunder, of grain, of war. Their technology was reimagined as magic, their science as miracle, and their legacy, though vast, became fragmented, woven into legends, scriptures, and the symbols on royal seals. Yet a thread remained unbroken: the belief that one day, the gods would return. The Mayans called it the end of the cycle. The Hebrews, the coming of the day of the Lord. The Sumerians spoke of the Kernugi, the place of return. All pointed to a time of reckoning, when the planet of the gods would rise again in the sky, and with it, those who had shaped the fate of Earth. Enki had predicted this. On his final tablet, he wrote, "The first things shall be the last, and what was begun in the marshes shall end among the stars." And somewhere out there, beyond Pluto, Nibiru waited. Silent, patient. Would it bring salvation or chaos? Enlightenment or ruin? Even the priests could not say. They only knew that the stones remembered. The stars remembered, and buried beneath the sands of Sumer, the gods still whispered through clay. Between Earth and Nibiru, there was a halfway place. A red, dusty world orbiting quietly in the cold silence of space. What we call Mars, but what the Anunnaki once called Lamu. Before Earth became the center of their grand experiment, Lamu was their first foothold in the solar system. And though it would later become desolate, it once held vibrant outposts, gleaming structures, and secrets now buried beneath rust and ruin. Lamu was not chosen by accident. From orbit, the planet appeared barren, but its ancient riverbeds and underground aquifers held potential. More importantly, its thin atmosphere made it a perfect way station for chariots arriving from Nibiru. They could land, refuel, recalibrate their instruments, and monitor Earth from afar. It was Enki, once again, who saw the potential. Working with his loyal servant Anzu, Enki orchestrated the construction of Lamu's first base. Using tools powered by firestones and crystalline cores, they carved chambers into the red rock, both for storage and for habitation. Structures were built to harmonize with the planet's magnetic fields, drawing power from sources modern science barely understands. But the most fascinating discovery came not from the Anunnaki, but within Lamu itself. Deep beneath a windswept plateau, Enki's team uncovered a structure not of their own making. A geometric monolith, older than even the council could date. It pulsed faintly with blue light, unmarked by any script, seemingly untouched by erosion. Was it a remnant of an even older race? A beacon? Or a message? The records say Enki was disturbed. He ordered the monolith sealed and its location erased from official maps. Only a few, including Anzu, knew of it afterward. But perhaps the most iconic structure on Lamu, the one that would stir human curiosity millennia later, was the face. Carved, some say, by Anzu himself in honor of his fallen commander Alalu, the face on Mars was meant to preserve a legacy. Alalu had once challenged Anu, claiming kingship over Nibiru. Defeated, exiled, and eventually sent to Earth, he had discovered the first traces of gold. But his victory was short-lived. After Alalu's death, Anzu had buried him on Lamu. With tools of divine origin, he sculpted a massive tomb, shaped like his master's visage, into the cliffside. For centuries it stood, untouched, watched only by stars and storms. Then, in 1976, a Viking orbiter would photograph it. NASA dismissed the face as a trick of light and shadow. But others were not so sure. Some theorists argued that the geometry was too precise, the symmetry too deliberate. Nearby, other formations, resembling pyramids, platforms, and causeways, seemed aligned with celestial coordinates. Could this have been an Anunnaki complex? A gateway between Earth and the stars? If so, why abandon it? The answer lies in Lamu's slow collapse. After the deluge and the nuclear fallout on Earth, many Anunnaki withdrew from the mission. The base on Lamu, once bustling, became obsolete. Without fresh supplies from Nibiru, its systems deteriorated. Radiation levels rose. Dust storms eroded everything in sight. One by one, the structures failed. Eventually, only shadows remained. And yet, some believe that Lamu is not empty. According to one tablet fragment, Enki stored a final archive beneath the tomb of Alalu. It contained the full genetic history of humanity, the designs for lost technology, and a prophecy, etched in gold leaf on sapphire stone, that warned of Earth's eventual awakening. The prophecy read, "When the children of clay awaken the sky with fire, when the blue sphere is ringed in iron, the cycle shall close. And we shall return." Was this a reference to satellites? Rockets? The space age? If so, then we have already crossed that threshold. Perhaps that is why interest in Mars has surged. Multiple space agencies now race to map its surface, mine its soil, and scan its geology. Elon Musk speaks of colonizing it, while rovers crawl its plains like mechanical pilgrims. But perhaps they seek more than science. Perhaps, unknowingly, they are drawn by memory. Enki's hidden vault, Alalu's tomb, the sealed monolith, all could still lie beneath Lamu's crimson crust, waiting to be uncovered not by gods, but by their wayward children, us. What happens if we find them? Will we remember what we were? Will we understand what we lost? Or will we, like the Anunnaki before us, turn tools of creation into weapons of war? In the silence of Lamu, beneath the whispering dust, the answers sleep. For now, after the flood and the slow fading of Lamu, power among the Anunnaki began to shift. The older gods, Anu, Enlil, Ninhursag, still held their thrones, but their grip on Earth loosened. In their place, younger beings stepped forward, bold and restless. Among them, none shone brighter or cast a longer shadow than Marduk. He was the son of Enki and the mortal woman Damkina. Born of two worlds, Marduk embodied the ambitions of both. From his father, he inherited wisdom and the flame of creation. From Earth, he drew passion, desire, and a hunger to rule. He was not content to remain in the background, to watch as the old gods argued over a fading mission. He wanted dominion, and he would claim it. In Babylon, Marduk built his power not just with force but with belief. He cultivated priests, shaped rituals, and commissioned texts that named him the king of the gods. The Enuma Elish, Babylon's creation epic, was not just myth. It was propaganda. In it, Marduk defeats the primordial chaos dragon Tiamat, organizes the cosmos, and builds a throne above all others. This rewriting of cosmic history enraged Enlil's lineage. To them, Marduk was a usurper, a second-generation hybrid who dared to claim a crown forged on Nibiru. Ninurta, Enlil's warrior son, saw Marduk's rise as heresy. Nergal, lord of the lower realms, warned that his ambitions would awaken the ancient weapons, the dreaded firestones buried since the deluge. The Anunnaki Council convened in Nippur. The air was thick with tension. Old grievances resurfaced. Enki pleaded for moderation, for recognition of a new age where humans and Anunnaki could share rule. But Enlil was unmoved. He feared what Marduk represented, the merging of human independence with divine inheritance. If Marduk succeeded, the entire Anunnaki order would collapse. And so, a dark proposal was made. Ninurta suggested deploying the weapons of terror, forbidden devices from the earliest days of Nibiru. These were not metaphor. The tablets speak of glowing metal spheres that hummed with energy, that turned stone to vapor and sky to fire. The same weapons, some believe, that obliterated Sodom and Gomorrah, or that left radioactive scars in the Indus Valley ruins. Nergal offered to wield them. He thirsted for a decisive end to the rebellion. And when the council hesitated, he pointed to celestial omens, comets shifting, planets trembling in their courses, as signs of Marduk's cosmic threat. Enlil, always the pragmatist, consented. What followed was devastation. Marduk's strongholds, cities that honored him over the old gods, were wiped out. The earth shook, the sky darkened, a poisonous wind spread across the plains. Entire populations vanished in hours. The evil wind, the texts call it, a weapon that made no distinction between mortal and divine. But Marduk survived. In the chaos, he vanished into the mountains. His followers scattered, but many remained loyal, convinced he would return. And he did, years later, not as a rebel, but as a savior. He walked into Babylon, not as a warlord, but as a god resurrected. And the people welcomed him. To them, the other gods had failed. They had brought floods, fire, famine. Marduk had survived it all. His temples rose, his priests flourished, and his image was carved into the stars. The constellation we now call Jupiter, brightest in the sky, was named in his honor. Even today, its ancient name lingers in the Akkadian, Amaru Dug, he who is the storm. Enlil's power waned, the council fractured, and Enki, older now, weary, retreated from public affairs. He spent his last days composing the tablets of destinies, etching not commands but reflections. He wrote of fate and choice, of cycles and consequences. He warned that power, once unleashed, could not be controlled. That humanity had inherited more than genes, it had inherited potential. Enki did not believe in fate as unchangeable. He saw it as a river, shaped by will. And he placed his faith not in the gods, but in the humans they had made. Marduk's reign would usher in new empires, Babylon, Assyria, Persia, all bearing marks of divine influence. But the tensions between old and new, between creator and created, between the sacred and the profane, those would never fully vanish. They live on in our myths, in our wars, in our ambition, for in every ruler who defies their inheritance, in every prophet who rewrites the laws, in every civilization that rises from ashes, there is a whisper of Marduk. And a shadow of the gods who feared him. As Marduk rose and the old order fractured, one figure remained steady, a watcher at the edge of war, a voice of reason fading into legend. Enki, scientist, creator, father of mankind, he had seen enough. The cities he helped build lay in ruins. The hybrids he designed, humans, were caught in a struggle not of their making. His brother Enlil had chosen judgment over mercy. His own son, Marduk, now ruled Babylon with divine ambition. The age of open Anunnaki rule was ending, and Enki knew that a new era, one shaped by human memory, not divine command, was beginning. So he turned inward. In the last decades of his presence on Earth, Enki withdrew to the sanctuaries of the south. Some say he returned to Eridu, his first outpost, now half swallowed by marshes. Others say he journeyed west, to a hidden chamber beneath the waters, where the past could be preserved beyond the reach of time or conquest. There, he composed the tablets of Enki. These were not declarations of law or divine judgment, like Enlil's edicts. Nor were they prophecies of doom, like the astrologers of Nippur. They were memories, records, warnings, written not for gods, but for humans. Etched into lapis lazuli and electrum, the tablets shimmered with strange energy. Their language was older than Sumerian, flowing like water yet dense with layered meanings. Enki poured into them the entire arc of his journey. The arrival from Nibiru, the creation of Adamu, the betrayal of the council, the flood, the rise of Marduk, the wars, the regrets. But perhaps most important were the MI. The MI were divine blueprints, cosmic programs encoded into reality itself. Each MI governed a principle of existence: kingship, language, fertility, technology, music, warfare. Enki had once gifted some of these to the humans, stored in sacred tablets or hidden within temples. But many were reclaimed by the gods after the wars. Now, he encoded them again, quietly, covertly, into the tablets of Enki. But he did not bury them in one place. Instead, he scattered them. Some went to Egypt, hidden beneath the temple of Dendera. Others were sealed beneath the ziggurats of Ur and Lagash. A few were entrusted to the priest kings of Dilmun and Magan, lost coastal kingdoms whose ruins now sleep beneath the Persian Gulf. One tablet, it said, was hidden beneath the Sphinx. Another beneath the sea, off the coast of what is now India. And one, the final tablet, was not hidden at all. It was placed in plain sight, carved into the stars. The Anunnaki called it the star map of the makers. It charts the cycle of Nibiru, marks the alignment of key planets, and shows the conjunction that will signal the gods' return. We call it the zodiac. Modern astrologers use it to predict personality and fate. But in Enki's time, it was a clock, measuring not hours but epochs. Each age, 2,160 years long, marked by a ruling constellation. We moved from Taurus to Aries, from Aries to Pisces, and now, into the age of Aquarius. Enki believed that in this age, humanity would awaken, that the long slumber of forgetfulness would lift, that the fragments of knowledge, the stone tablets, the myths, the ruins, the DNA, would begin to reassemble themselves. That humans would rediscover who they truly were. His final message, recorded on the last tablet, read, "Do not worship us. Remember us. You are not our servants. You are our legacy. What we began, you must complete." In this, Enki differed from the others. Enlil saw humans as dangerous children. Ninurta saw them as tools. Marduk saw them as subjects. But Enki saw them as peers in progress. He understood the weight of what had been done, splicing genes, altering destinies, triggering floods and wars. But he also understood potential. He had seen it in the spark of Adamu's eyes, in the defiance of Unapishtim, in the builders of ziggurats and the dreamers of stars. He believed humanity could rise beyond the gods. That was the hope sealed in his tablets. Today, archaeologists find strange fragments, out-of-place artifacts, undeciphered symbols, tablets that speak of gods from the sky. Most are filed away in museums, labeled myth. But a few researchers, quietly, obsessively, begin to notice patterns. Why do so many ancient myths speak of a great flood? Why do origin stories across continents speak of sky beings and knowledge bringers? Why do megalithic sites align so precisely with star positions from 10,000 years ago? What if these are not legends? What if they are echoes? Of Enki, of the Anunnaki, of ourselves? And what happens when we decode the last of the tablets? When we read not as servants, but as descendants? When the stars align once more, and Nibiru returns, will we bow? Or will we stand, remembering who we are? As the last of Enki's tablets were hidden across the earth, something strange began to unfold. In Sumer, in Babylon, in Thebes and Ugarit, scribes began to record histories that were not entirely their own. Clay tablets and scrolls told tales of divine kings who ruled for thousands of years, of sky chariots, of forbidden knowledge brought down by beings who were not born of earth. But over time, centuries upon centuries, these texts were edited, redacted, or vanished altogether. The knowledge Enki had fought to preserve was slipping from view. And yet, not all was lost. Among the fragments that survived are whispers of the lost books of the Anunnaki. These were not mere stories or legends. They were coded histories, compiled by priests who had been initiated into the mysteries. Texts like the Book of Jasher, the Book of the Wars of Yahweh, and the Book of Enoch reference epics that predate recorded time. Though later declared apocryphal or heretical, they may preserve shards of a deeper truth. Take the Book of Enoch, for instance. It describes a man taken to the heavens, taught by angels, watchers, the secrets of stars, of weather, of time. It speaks of a great rebellion, of forbidden unions between heavenly beings and mortal women. The result? A race of giants, the Nephilim, who once ruled the earth. This aligns disturbingly well with older Mesopotamian records. The Anunnaki, Enki's creation of mankind, the genetic experiments that blurred the line between God and man, all echo in the tales of the Nephilim. Not metaphor, memory. And what of the Epic of Gilgamesh? It speaks of a king two-thirds divine, who seeks immortality by finding Unapishtim, the lone human who survived the Great Flood. Gilgamesh journeys to the edge of the world, fights celestial beasts, and discovers that even the gods are not immortal. Here too, myth and memory intertwine. The flood described in the Atrahasis, the Sumerian king lists impossibly long reigns, the sudden appearance of civilization. All suggest a deliberate reboot of humanity after a planetary catastrophe. One triggered by the Anunnaki themselves. A hard reset. Some researchers, both fringe and academic, have begun to argue that this ancient story of destruction matches the geological record. Around 12,000 years ago, the Earth experienced the Younger Dryas, a sudden cooling that ended the last ice age. Accompanying this shift were floods, rising sea levels, and a possible comet impact. Civilizations, if they existed, would have been drowned and erased. Could this have been the evil wind the Anunnaki released? Or the aftermath of a cosmic event tied to Nibiru's return? And still, some records persist. In Egypt, the priest Manetho, writing in the 3rd century BCE, chronicled a line of divine rulers who governed for tens of thousands of years before the pharaohs. In Babylon, the historian Berossus wrote of gods descending from the heavens, led by Oans, a half-man, half-fish being who brought law, writing, and agriculture. Across Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl was remembered as a white-bearded god who arrived from the east bringing knowledge, only to vanish, promising to return. India's Vedic texts speak of Vimanas, flying chariots that battled in the skies using weapons that scorched the earth. The Mahabharata recounts wars between gods, destruction that sounds eerily like nuclear fire. These parallels are not coincidence. They are threads, woven across continents, across languages, across millennia. Together, they form a secret history of humanity, one not taught in schools, one that challenges the modern narrative that civilization arose suddenly, magically, in Sumer around 3000 BCE. What if it had already risen, and fallen, many times before? What if the gods of myth were flesh and blood visitors, bearers of knowledge, genetic architects who sparked the human flame only to fear its brightness? Enlil feared us, Marduk used us, but Enki believed in us. That belief, that we could grow into our own power, is perhaps the most radical idea the Anunnaki left behind. The lost books tell us as much. In one fragment recovered from Nineveh, a scribe writes, "The gods are not eternal. They are merely ahead. The day shall come when man shall read the stars as they did, and write destiny with his own hand." That day may be closer than we think. Today, humans explore DNA as if it were code. We launch probes beyond the solar system. We speak of terraforming Mars, of building AI, of rewriting life itself. In a very real sense, we are becoming the gods we once worshipped. But do we carry their wisdom, their restraint, or will we repeat their mistakes? The tablets are gone, the libraries burned, but the questions remain, waiting in the ruins, echoing in the myths, inscribed in our very blood, and somewhere, perhaps on a distant rock, or in a chamber beneath the sea, a final tablet remains. Silent, until we are ready. In the twilight of the Anunnaki age, as cities crumbled and divine rule gave way to human kingship, one final mystery lingered above all others. Would Nibiru return? According to the ancient records, Enki's lapis tablets, Sumerian star charts, and Babylonian omens, Nibiru, the homeworld of the Anunnaki, follows an immense elliptical orbit, taking 3,600 Earth years to complete a single revolution around the Sun. Its path brings it from the frozen edges of deep space to a point perilously close to Earth's gravitational cradle. Each time it comes near, cataclysms follow. Floods, plagues, earthquakes, civilizations vanish, myths are born. In the age of Eridu, its return coincided with the deluge. Later, some believe it passed during the time of Abraham, as fire fell on Sodom. Still others tie it to the Bronze Age collapse, a mysterious period of destruction across the Mediterranean world. But according to Enki, Nibiru's return was never just an astronomical event. It was a reckoning. In the final lines of the Tablets of Destiny, he wrote, "When Nibiru returns, the heavens shall shake, and the earth shall answer. The past shall awaken, and what was hidden shall be known." He described not just geological chaos, but spiritual upheaval. The return of the creators. The awakening of the created. A moment when humanity, no longer bound by ignorance, would confront the full truth of its origins. And then, choose. Nibiru was not a death sentence. It was a test. Would humans prove worthy of their spark? Or would they perish, as they had before? The priests of Nippur feared this prophecy. They warned that the knowledge of the Anunnaki was too dangerous, that it had already led to rebellion, war, and the near extinction of mankind. They buried tablets, sealed archives, and passed only the sanitized versions of history down through priest kings and scribes. But others preserved the flame. In Egypt, the Hermetic texts echoed Enki's vision of divine intelligence within man. In Greece, Prometheus, a god who gave fire to humanity and suffered for it, mirrored Enki's fate. In Judaism, the Kabbalistic idea that humans are made in God's image carried the same spark. We are not lesser, only younger. And now, in our own age, the signs return. Comets entering the inner solar system, magnetic fields weakening, anomalous heat waves, shifts in Earth's rotation. Some researchers, quietly, cautiously, suggest that another planetary body may be disturbing the outer planets. They call it Planet 9, a massive object that seems to tug on celestial orbits from the dark. But the ancients already had a name for it, Nibiru. If it returns, and some say it is already nearing the threshold, it may not come with flaming swords or thunderbolts. Its danger may be more subtle, psychological, cultural, existential. The return of memory. For in the ruins of Sumer, the deserts of Egypt, the glyphs of the Maya, and the buried cities beneath the Pacific and Atlantic, there lies a buried truth. That humanity is not an accident, not a blank slate, but a continuation. The Anunnaki may have left, or they may have simply hidden. Some say they walk among us in secret, guiding global shifts. Others say their blood runs through ancient lineages, protected by families of immense influence. Still others believe they left watchers, machines, constructs, or even cloned emissaries, to observe us until the cycle completes. And what happens then? That is the final question. Enki believed we were capable of greatness, of healing the divisions the gods never could. Enlil feared we would become too powerful. Marduk wanted to rule us, shaping the world in his image. But Enki left the decision to us. His prophecy closed with a final riddle. The first shall be the last, and the last shall be the first. The dust shall remember its form, and the stars their seed. In the age when gods are forgotten, man shall rise not in rebellion, but in recognition. Recognition of the ruins beneath our feet, of the stardust in our veins, of the spark, left behind by ancient hands, that still burns within us. So now we stand, at the edge of another turning. The myths have returned, the sky shifts, and the question echoes louder than ever. Are we ready? Not for gods to return, but to remember, we were gods in training all along.